Earlier today, Russia flatly and unceremoniously rejected a peace proposal put forth by President-elect Donald Trump's team. This plan aimed to delay Ukraine's NATO membership by 20 years to alleviate fears that Russia may have about Ukraine joining NATO. In exchange, Ukraine would continue to receive Western arms supplies, and European peacekeepers would be deployed to monitor a ceasefire in Ukraine. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov outrightly dismissed the plan, stating that Ukraine's accession to NATO is categorically unacceptable to Russia, no matter the timeline. He also rejected the idea of deploying Western peacekeepers from Europe, including those from Britain, mainly because of the Western influence they would bring and the absence of any counterbalancing peacekeeping force from the Russian sphere of influence. Ukraine has wisely not commented on Trump's proposal, likely because they don't want to get on Trump's bad side this early into his term. Plus, they already knew Russia would reject the proposal long before Ukraine had to make any decisions about it. Trump's proposal to delay Ukraine's NATO membership by 20 years while keeping Ukraine armed was his administration's first official attempt to ease tensions between Russia, the United States, Ukraine, basically the major players in the region. However, the plan was doomed from the start, as Russia was unlikely to accept such terms, and even with a 100-year NATO moratorium, experts widely expected Putin to reject peacekeeping forces outright. Moscow has historically resisted international peacekeeping forces wherever Russia operates, fearing it could lose control of the region and that such forces might serve as tools for Western policy. There are several implications for this Russian rejection. First, both Ukraine and Russia remain firmly entrenched in their negotiating positions, meaning given the battlefield situation, neither wants to negotiate away territory. Ukraine knows that Russia doesn't have the capacity to take over their entire country, while Russia knows that Ukraine can't fully eject Russian forces. As a result, neither side is moving forward. No amount of Trump's art of the deal negotiating tactics will change this without significant pressure applied to one or both parties. It's likely that this proposal is just an icebreaker, and pressure from the Trump administration may eventually come into play in the form of either cutting off or accelerating weapons deliveries to Ukraine. Either way, you can bet on Ukraine being silent for now, letting Russia be the one to reject proposals out of the Trump administration, which is a smart move on Kyiv's part. When it comes to Russia's leadership cycles, a 20-year timeline is hardly a long time. Putin himself has been in power for 25 years, so the idea of kicking NATO membership down the road for 2 decades was really never going to satisfy Moscow. What's really interesting about this situation is how quickly Russia rejected the proposal. Typically, when the US brings a proposal to the table, Russia takes weeks, sometimes months, to consider and discuss. Sometimes they do it out of respect for a fellow superpower. Other times it's so they can form a hard-hitting counteroffer. This time, the response came in just days, with a hard no, and apparently no room for negotiations. Having worked in the Russian foreign policy space, I can tell you this kind of swift, outright rejection came because the Kremlin saw the terms as an insult, which likely set back any hope of a reset in relations that Trump might have envisioned. For Ukraine, Russia's rejection presents an opportunity to position themselves as the better choice for Trump's support. Kyiv could approach the Trump administration with a narrative like, "See, we want to work with you. We just need the tools to defend ourselves in the meantime," which potentially could secure additional weapons or aid from the US. It's worth noting that Trump has flip-flopped on several campaign promises, including those related to immigration, Ukraine, and the potential impact of tariffs on American workers. Given that track record, it's not out of the question for the Trump administration to lean more heavily into Ukraine's corner, especially if Moscow continues such rapid, dismissive rejections. For broader Europe, this rejection should be a wake-up call. It signals that Putin is unwilling to negotiate with a fellow power, and European nations should probably accelerate their efforts to strengthen their defenses. Putin has put Russia on a war footing, and as I've discussed in previous analyses, Ukraine is unlikely to be his final target. Estonia and other Baltic states are rightfully on edge here. Within the US, one thing is certain: Trump doesn't take rejection or being embarrassed lightly. The Kremlin seems to believe that because Trump campaigned on anti-Ukraine stances, they hold leverage over the administration. They're daring Trump to break his campaign promises to cut off aid to Ukraine. Now, this rejection from Russia is more than just a diplomatic snub. It's a calculated move to test Trump's resolve and exploit his past rhetoric. By rejecting the proposal so swiftly and unceremoniously, Putin is sending a clear message. He believes Trump can be manipulated into abandoning Ukraine. If Trump wants to prove he's not just another pawn in Putin's game, he needs to act decisively. This is not the time for naive deals or vague promises. It's a moment to show strength. Back Ukraine unequivocally and remind Russia that the US won't tolerate its aggression. Anything less will embolden Putin to push even further, and history has shown us that appeasing Russia never ends well.